Greetings and welcome to an extra special, supersized, 3-part bacon and cheese, all the fixings episode of Genre Grinder. Today we are talking about the weird, wild, sick, sad world of shot-on-video horror movies. My co-host in this journey, though given the amount of research he's done on the subject, perhaps I should call myself his co-host, is Directors Club and Tracks of the Dams, Patrick Ripoll. Patrick, say hi.
Hi, how's it going?
It's going all right. For the record, we were recording this in 3 parts, and we had already recorded this first part, and there was an accident at the lab, and everything was destroyed in a fire, and we salvaged part 2, but we have to re-record part 1. So if we end up referring to like the last time we spoke or something like that, that's what we mean, is that we recorded this once and we're trying to remember everything we said, but I don't think we're going to lose that much. We did have a chance to rewatch a couple movies, so we were caught up with each other. In fact, I guess I only ended up watching one, but still.
I did as well, though, so still. It's going to be even better than the last time.
Even better. So together, Patrick and I have developed a list of films that were verifiably shot on video, though video, and quote, video can mean anything from a literal VHS tape shoved into a consumer-grade camcorder to relatively high-resolution professional television equipment, like 1-inch tape and Betacam were some that came up when I did a search. I tried to draw the line at movies that were made before the consumer-grade digital camcorders and cameras.
Right, because everything is shot on video now. Like, Midsummer is a shot-on-video horror movie. It's just that video means a different thing in a digital age than it did then.
It just meant the analog alternative to film.
Right.
And all TV, soap opera, sitcoms, the news, that stuff was all shot on video, which is why it looks, all those older shows look fine on DVD because they're roughly the same resolution.
The thing is that it's when shot on video, I think when people talk about shot on video horror movies, they tend to mean a specific thing, and often that specific thing is like dirtbag teenagers making extremely gory movies with their friends, which definitely is a large percentage of the films we're going to be talking about now. But it is not the only avenue of these video films. And I am going to keep calling them films, even though we are only talking about movies that are shot on video, just because,
I mean, we could use the word cinema.
Right.
even though none of them were shown in a cinema.
Only one that I know of on this list was shown in a cinema.
So there was also a lot of movies that I was actually looking forward to talking to. I could think of one was called The Abomination, that I thought were shot on video, but it turned out that they were shot on film and edited on video. And that has a different visual quality to it. So there might be someday down the line, maybe we'll talk about 8mm films and films that were shot on film but edited on video so that they look similarly trashy.
I went into
That's sort of a different thing.
went into this assuming we'd be talking a bunch about the films of Tim Ritter, but it turns out most of Tim Ritter's early stuff was that exact thing, shot on 16mm, edited on video.
So, yeah, it's a little different. Also, the list we came up with, which is by no means complete, is 92 movies, of which Letterboxd tells me I watched 24. I don't know how many Patrick watched, but it was something close to that.
Yeah.
So it's already too many movies. We're already doing a 3-part thing here.
But
we don't need to add every single fucking thing shot on video.
The fun thing about shot on video, like we said, part of this contingent is dirtbag teenagers making gross out movies with their friends, and then part of it is professionals using television equipment to produce features. But part of the fun is technically, if you were a child in the 80s and you made a monster movie where you put green makeup on your friend's face and he went rah towards the camera, like, you made a shot on video horror movie. And some of the movies that we're going to be talking about are literally that amateurish. So part of the fun is...
And you ended up on in equal footing with the guys who shot using the professional equipment. And released it straight to television in Canada or whatever.
In fact, a lot of these movies that were shot on less professional equipment had a much bigger sort of footprint in the video stores, which is pretty much what all of these movies were made for, that market. There are some made for TV, but most of these were made for the burgeoning in the 80s direct-to-video market.
Which was a thing that really that is people my age and a little bit older, and I guess Patrick's age too. I'm 40 this year. It made a difference. Like there you really would pick this shit up, and we didn't want to say that that horror fans from the video generation had no taste or were bad judges of quality. But like I said the last time we recorded, we were willing to try anything once.
Yeah.
Is what it came down to. So if something had interesting cover art and promised a lot of violence and was unrated was another nice touch, you'd probably give it a shot. I know that I did. I mean, we had video stores where you go into the mom and pop video store and there would be a section for horror that they would have set up like a little haunted house. Like you'd have to walk through. The only things that would do that with the horror section and the adult section. You'd have to like walk through a boudoir entry to go to the adult section. And this was at multiple video stores when I was growing up in both Tucson and Phoenix. So I imagine it was all over at least the American West.
Yeah, long before I was a cinephile or had ever seen a horror movie in my life, the grocery store, the Randalls, shout out to Houston, Texas, Randalls. Well, we would go to the Randalls, and my mom would go grocery shopping, and she'd leave me in the sort of video store that was connected to it. And I would just wander around and look at the boxes. And the section that I liked the most was the horror section because they had all the interesting screenshots and the most interesting movie posters and stuff like that. And it was always very intriguing and attractive. And the thing about, especially these early days, the pre-90s days of video stores, is that the video market was the big studios were terrified that the video market was going to destroy them. And I mean, we are now seeing with an aid of a global pandemic, yeah, kind of.
Right.
I feel
it pushed it a little faster, we'll say.
One of the things that's really fascinating about going back and watching these movies is seeing that not just horror, there were shot on video action movies and shot on video, ton of shot on video children's movies. You want to talk about undiscerning audiences, and of course pornography. But we are sort of seeing the beginning of what you can call it the end of a medium or a radical shift in the medium. Like it really does lie in these tapes. And the thing is, big studio tapes were priced outrageously expensive because they didn't want anyone to own these tapes. They just wanted a video store they would spend $80 on Christopher Reeve's Superman because they knew that over time they would get that $80 back and then some. It wasn't until Batman in late 89 or maybe early 1990 when Batman came out on VHS, that was sort of priced to own, and that changed everything. And so what happened is a lot of these video stores in the 80s, they carried a lot of these cheaper independent tapes, or there would be labels that would just release public domain tapes and really shoddy versions and stuff like that, because those were easy to fill. So whereas when you're ordering all these tapes, it was a lot easier to get a bunch of these cheap video violence and splatter farm and whatnot than it was to get the Boris Karloff Mummy. So in turn the video stores tend to be kind of weighted towards these not shot on video horror movies exclusively, the lower budget independent films.
Yeah, that were planned this way, or released in another country theatrically, and pretty much planned for. One thing I learned is the Italian market started to when it started to wane in the mid '80s, they started to actually aim directly at the American video market, and so they would start shooting movies in English there in America. I didn't know this until recently. And action movies in particular, they weren't usually shot on video. That's actually a good point I should bring up, is this list we have is heavily weighted to North America. There are a couple European ones and a couple Mexican ones. I think one Guatemalan one, was that? I can't remember.
One African one.
And one African one. And this is obviously, there's just no way that these were, quote, Western. And this wasn't something that wasn't happening all over the world, particularly Japan. And one advantage of re-recording this is I remembered that I had some research I had already done about some Japanese exploitation movies, and I went and found it. And so Japan, which was the heart of consumer grade electronics during the 80s, had a huge straight to video horror industry, including they would actually, like, the Italian horror filmmakers would make movies basically for the Japanese market. A lot of the really gory early 80s horror movies were like, well, we'll make our money back in the Japanese market. But there are probably thousands of Japanese horror movies that were shot on video, but what they were shot using this professional TV equipment that we were talking about, but they would shoot for video. And a lot of them were softcore porn and Yakuza movies, which is the reason I remembered this is Takashi Miike of Audition, Inishi the Killer fame. His earliest films were really violent, really cheaply made Yakuza movies that he shot on video. And I was going to try to do some research into exactly what movies were shot on video horror from Japan, but there's not a lot of actual information. IMDb tends to just sort of say color and not a film stock or video stock. So you kind of have to guess. But one that I knew for a fact and verified was the original TV version of Ju-on, known as Ju-on the Curse from 2000. Was shot on video for television. And then it was remade as Ju-on the Grudge on film in 2002, and then remade again as Ju-on, or just the Grudge in America on film in 2004. And then a fun fact about that is Takashi Shimizu, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but Takashi Shimizu directed all three of those movies I said, as well as Ju-on the Curse 2, Ju-on the Grudge 2, The Grudge 2, two shot on video prequel shorts to The Grudge, and Ju-on the Grudge the video game.
He directed the video game.
Yeah, he directed the video game, and he's the only credited director. It's nuts.
Good on him for finding his lane.
Yeah.
Were those guinea pig movies shot on video?
That was actually when I was trying to verify. I'm almost positive the early ones were Flower, Flesh, and Blood, and I think Devil's Experiment. The first two that are basically just fake snuff film shorts. I'm almost positive those were shot on video. But again, IMDb just says color. It doesn't say... It just says the aspect ratio and color. It doesn't say the source. But I'm pretty sure those were, and then it got more popular and they started to use film. And they got more creative too.
The other thing about the shot on video world is that it sort of is constantly bubbling under a lot of critical discussion because unlike a lot of independent films, there are not really many or any shot on video filmmakers who went on to then be mainstream or crossover hits, you know?
So they don't have a Robert Rodriguez.
Right. People will go back and they'll be like, wow, you know, we'll watch The Terror because we know that Francis Ford Coppola would go on to do such, you know, great and grand Hollywood films. But shot on video filmmakers pretty much stayed in that lane, and therefore a lot of the interest in them comes from more genre-focused critical outlets, and it's a very specific sort of thing. Like Bleeding Skull is sort of on the vanguard of that, and there's not a lot of like academic writing on these films, and because it is a smaller niche, it is probably going to be people who are more interested in films that reflect the countries they live in. So it is going to be the ones that get talked about the most are going to be the American ones. Exactly. That have their own specific regionalisms that are fascinating in a way that if we were watching a Japanese shot on video movie, it might also have interesting regionalisms that we just wouldn't pick up on. So that's another reason why our list will skew very North American.
Yeah, I should say another. The Bleeding Skull was a big part of this research. There's another one called Analog Nightmares, the shot on video horror films of 1982 to 95 by Richard Mogg, which I was not able to buy in time. So I kind of glanced through it on the look inside on on Amazon. So I apologize to Richard Mogg. I did not actually buy your book, but maybe two people will buy it because they'll hear this podcast. Yeah,
Bleeding Skull, very helpful because there's a lot of these movies that we did not see, and just being able to look up info on that site for a lot of them was very helpful.
And I guess before we get started, the other thing we had talked about the first time is I was asking Patrick if he had any memories of actually shooting on video, because these days everybody has a phone with a pretty good video, and we have TikTok and we used to have Vine and Instagram stories and YouTube. Pretty much anybody can very easily make their own movie and put it somewhere where people can find it. But when I was a kid, there was something kind of special. We had one friend with a VHS camcorder, and we would record ourselves, mostly dancing to like Milli Vanilli or CNC Music Factory or whatever was popular at the time, and then we'd rush and go watch it. That was what was special, and we'd have to make our parents watch it, but we couldn't really show our friends unless we invited them all over to our house or something. And when Wayne's World came out, we were particularly smitten with Wayne's World, and we made a big Wayne's World skit that would cut away to us dancing to, Kid and Play or whatever. And my friend's house, their family house was robbed, and our tape was in the VCR at the time. So I always have this fantasy that someday 11-year-old me is going to become a YouTube sensation for my Wayne's World impression that some rando found at Goodwill in Arizona and uploaded onto YouTube.
Yeah, so you're going to be part of some Everything is Terrible compilation.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think probably little kids dancing in front of a camera must be some fundamental thing about youth, because obviously that's a big part of TikTok. The difference is TikTok creates a sort of engagement loop that means that kids are much better at dancing than they were in our age, because they have all these other videos of other kids dancing, so they can learn all the hot steps and everything. Whereas, if we were lucky, we were able to catch a same music video a couple times and maybe learn something, but other than that, we're on our own. So we just kind of look like dorks, whereas kids these days are incredible dancers. But honestly, that was a very common phenomenon. There's a video of me and my cousins dancing around to, I forget the name of the group, the Something Boys, their country hit Elvira. And it's, there's that, of course. And then, of course, I made a bunch of like little skits and stuff. I never had the ambition to make a feature-length film, but I would do a lot of sketch comedy with the camcorder and stop motion. Stop motion is another thing that it's like, if you don't want to write out a script and then write it out again and then hand it and everyone learn lines and try to do all of that as a child, what you can do is just move your action figures by just pressing record and stopping and pressing record and stopping. And so there was a lot of like weird little stop motion sketches I did as well.
Yeah, and I said in the other recording that I had actually taken 2 summer school courses for animation, so they had me convinced you had to use an 8mm camera with a special attachment, and that I couldn't do it with my friend's camcorder, which is obviously bullshit in retrospect. One thing I did totally forget about until the other day, which makes me a little glad we lost this, even though this is not a very interesting story, is I actually did take a quote filmmaking course when I was like 8. Because I always had summer school stuff, because my mom worked in a district that had expensive summer school. Because she worked in it, I got to go for free. And I would always go to these schools where I didn't have any friends. I didn't know any of the kids there, so I'd always make friends with like the misfits. And we made a short film about a giant spider that my friend happened to have, a giant spider toy I liked, attacking New York and being killed by a ninja because the other friend happened to have a gi. And we made a flaming sword with paper mache, and that was our entire movie. And the teacher did all the editing for us. I think we just shot a bunch of footage and he did the rest of it. But that was definitely camcorders.
I think all of this is to lead into the fact that when part of the appeal of shot on video movies is that there is a home movie feel to it. There is the same way that independent films are sort of inherently more interesting than studio films because they feel more personal and less designed by committee. Shot on video films, especially the lower budget, more amateur ones, are extremely that. And because it's actually using the same equipment that you would use to record a family reunion or whatever, you watch them, if you are of a certain age, you watch them, and just the texture of the videotape has a certain nostalgia to it. And it's clear that they're shooting these scenes in their actual homes. And so there's just a sort of fascinating documentary-like quality to so many of these movies where they become documentaries about their own making. You sort of see glimpses into the lives of the people who make them, just because they can't help it. And I think if I were to explain the appeal of shot on video movies to someone who did not live through that era, or who doesn't have that sort of distinct nostalgia for these specific years and this equipment, it might be a little harder. I'm sure there are still, in fact, I know for a fact there are a ton of younger filmmakers who are very inspired by the shot on video films of the 80s, and a lot of the stuff that ends up on Amazon Prime that's made for no money and is, shot with either iPhones or cheap DSLRs, like a lot of that stuff is very much influenced by this. So I know that it still resonates with a younger audience, but I wonder if it's the same thing.
Yeah, and it has an antiquity to it that I think the stuff like tracking lines and tape errors have a sort of scariness to them, like inherent in what they are, which is kind of goes back to the video art thing we talked about last time, that some of these video artists that started this phenomenon were into the texture of it as much as the format of it. And I think that stuff is now seen as creepy to kids. I think that there's like filters in your whatever program you're using for your YouTube videos. There's filters that do VHS style effects.
Oh yeah. There's tons of music videos that use that sort of stuff. The When It Rains video by Danny Brown is sort of like, that is to VHS textures what I forget the filmmakers who made Strange Color of Your Body's Tears and a Mirror.
Oh yeah, the two French filmmakers. I do not remember their names.
But like the same way they fetishize the Euro cult films of the 70s, like they're and it's just this way overblown interpretation of them. That music video is that as well. So certainly that has become an aesthetic all to itself. Video artists is also an interesting thing to talk about, because for a long time video was considered a sort of different medium than film, just because there were different effects that you could do with it, and because of the quickness with, you don't need to develop video the way you develop film, and there are certain things that you can do with video that you can't do with film, just because you can project it on a screen as you're shooting it. Video artists were sort of considered separate from like experimental filmmakers, but a lot of early video is more in that avant-garde space. And I think part of the fun of these movies is, even though they tend to be very by the numbers sort of horror stories and narratives in most cases, they have that weird avant-garde edge to them. And when they sort of dip into that experimental nature and in some of those video effects, the result is kind of spectacular.
But we should probably get into the movies here, since there are exactly 1 million of them.
Yeah.
And so, last time Patrick introduced each of them, and he did such a good job. I'm going to let him keep doing that.
Sure thing.
So
we're going to start with the very first, as far as we know, and as far as most people knows. I've asked people who are experts in this field, and they have confirmed that, as far as they know, Boarding House from 1982, directed by John Wintergate, is the first shot-on-video horror movie. And the funny thing about it is it actually doesn't set the standard for what a lot of shot-on-video horror movies are to be, which is to say that this is the only movie on this list, other than perhaps possibly in Michigan in a different format, that was screened theatrically. Boarding House was actually shot in 1982 for video, and then later was printed onto 35 millimeter for drive-ins, and that sort of secondary theatrical market. And that's actually how I saw Boarding House about 2 years ago now. Was a midnight screening of a 35 millimeter print of this shot on film, which is absolutely bizarre looking, because this is a good example of some of the weird video effects that happen. And there's a certain texture and there's a certain frame rate that then, when transferred to 24 frames per second celluloid, it just looks wrong and weird. And so Boarding House is, I always think of it sort of similar to a Lucio Fulci film, not in terms of it has the same feel, but just because it is sort of a slasher movie and sort of a supernatural horror movie, and it's kind of hard to tell how the two meet. It is
Right.
it is also a wild vanity project by John Wintergate, the writer, director, and star of the film. He kind of looks like a super coked up Malcolm McDowell, and I am almost positive he is on cocaine through the whole movie. The plot is that he's a man who owns a house and he wants to rent out the rooms to hot, it's referred to in the movie as unattached women. And he does so, and they're basically his harem. I think he gets sort of a sex scene with each one of them, including one of them who his wife plays. But then also there's murders happening, and he has some sort of psychic abilities, and also there's a lot of really bad rock music that I think is from his band, and it's such a strange movie. It's got such a manic energy to it. He's in a Speedo for most of it. It's just like, it's super LA.
He's super stringy. He's got like 0% body fat, so he's really veiny and weird. And he's got his hair looks like it's been fried with peroxide. Yeah, and he has this whole new wave kind of sitting in an cross-leg position thing going on, and to me, coupled with the fact that it's sort of like putting his polyamorous relationships to film, it has a sort of this is a movie that someone made when they failed to create a cult. Is
Yes.
the way I put it. And it didn't quite work out, so you just made I swear it was meant to. I think that somewhere it was meant to be a softcore porn film, and then they realized they could sell horror. And I know that these days Wintergate, the DVD that came out actually had some interviews with him, and he claims that it was supposed to be funny, which is same thing M. Night Shyamalan said about The Happening. When people laugh at your movie, or what's his name with
Tommy
The Room.
Wiseau, yeah, absolutely.
Wiseau said The Room was supposed to be funny. It's just something that happens when you mess up and you try to embrace your cult following. How many, like, there are some killings in it.
Yeah.
It's got some blood.
I want to say most of the girls, so it's probably like 4 or 5 deaths. I think it opens on a scene where someone gets hung, but there is this like force that is sort of represented by this video effect, like outline of a figure of a person that sort of precedes these killings. And again, I saw this about 2 years ago, and it was already just such a manic, weird experience. I can't quite remember the plot details, but it's a very good cult object. It's very good shot on video sort of cult object in terms of just the weirdness and the textures, and the same way that Tommy Wiseau shot The Room on film and digitally side by side just because he couldn't make up his mind. You get the idea that in 1982 this guy thought that video was a fine format for a feature film just because he was kind of out of his mind, and no one was going to tell him otherwise.
He had no oversight.
I guess you need to be have that sort of insane brilliance to venture out into uncharted territory the way that John Wintergate did. So shout out to him.
Or insane narcissism. It's very narcissistic movie. But that's something that ends up coming up quite a bit here as we go down the line, I think.
There's no shortage of vanity projects in the world of shot on video. But again, like, part of the fun is that it feels like you're watching home movies and you're getting a glimpse into the people who make movies. And there's really few examples quite as good as Boarding House. The next one is a Swedish film called Blodaren, probably pronouncing that wrong, from 1983.
I think it has an umlaut, so it's
Blodaren. 1983 by Hans Hadvig. It's an all-girl rock band called the Rock Cats. Their bus breaks down, and it's a slasher movie where they kind of get chased around by a slasher named the Bleeder, which is what Blodaren means in Swedish. And it's, it all takes place around in the woods and abandoned houses, and it has a reputation of being very kind of slow and boring, and I don't think it's shot on. I think it is shot on more professional grade equipment, which inherently makes it less texturally, aesthetically interesting.
Yeah,
So I didn't. This is a harder one to find. I didn't see it personally, but certainly doesn't
I
sound like
couldn't find it
one to
either.
seek out. The next one, also similarly, is Copperhead, the Snake movie from 1983, directed by Leland Payton. This is shot in Missouri, and it is like it's a lot of gun porn, is my understanding. It's the story involves a bunch of thieves who are gun nuts. They sort of hole up in a house after a big heist, and there are snakes all around them, and they shoot the snakes. And the thing about this movie that makes it kind of hard to watch is that there are just a lot of real animal deaths. There are a lot of real snakes. I don't know if they're copperheads or not, but real snakes getting shot on camera. A lot of the stuff I read about this movie implies that it's like very fetishistic about the guns and stuff, and kind of just a really sleazy kind of a piece of crap.
It sounds unpleasant all
Yeah,
around.
absolutely.
Personally, I do not want to watch snakes. Get
No,
killed,
I'm not a big snake guy, but I don't want to get a bunch of snakes and one snapping turtle get shot for no reason.
I'm a big fan of snakes. They're
Yeah.
pretty cool. Pretty cool.
Speaking of pretty cool, possibly in Michigan from 1983, directed by Cecilia Condit. This is one of the more well-known shot-on-video horror films at this point. It's a short film. It's 12 minutes long, but it went viral on TikTok. It's not necessarily the biggest thing happening on TikTok, but it is the kind of the way the dialogue is performed. It is a horror comedy musical experimental video art kind of a thing, and so all the dialogue is sung in a kind of a melodic way. And one of the things that people do on TikTok is they lip sync clips from movies or songs or whatever. So I understand that the way it went viral on TikTok is sort of people doing that, but it is so cool. It is. I think it was rediscovered on the internet not too long ago, like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when someone posted a clip of it on a subreddit dedicated to sort of weird or confusing things. And it is very funny, and it's very charming, and it's got a sweetness, and it's about these two young women in a mall, and they're being stalked by this masked man in a tuxedo, and there is a narrator who is narrating about the trouble that this woman has dating men, and this very ominous man in the mask in the tuxedo is following her around, and her friend lure him back to their house, where they murder him and eat him, and then throw his remains in trash bags, and then throw those into a garbage truck. And it's a musical. The music is really cool and weird and low budget. A lot of these movies have extremely low budget soundtracks done on like Casio keyboards, and this is that taken to the next step because it's a musical. But it's extremely charming.
When I tried to find it on YouTube, I was met with a lot of remixes of the song, and then a lot of people animated their own little versions set to the song, which is a cool thing that YouTube has, is people take audio they like and make like a 6 to 30 second long animated short about it. And so I did get a chance to finally watch this one since we had to re-record. And to me, this is what every terrible live action Adult Swim show and Dotist wannabe YouTuber thinks that they're making.
Yeah.
Personally, I find a lot of that shit just impossible to watch. Like I'm not a fan of Tim and Eric and all that stuff. But it's that sort of vibe to it, except for it's genuine. But it also knows it's funny. It's not like it's accidentally funny or anything like that. It's just weird in a funny way, and it is like a meme, and it to the point where it almost feels like it was made last year or something. That like some kids or some young adults found a mall that hadn't been revamped or whatever, like an abandoned mall, and just sort of shot this thing inside of it. The mall is the thing that verifies that it couldn't have been filmed recently because you'd have to reset dress that whole place.
Yeah, it really is amazing how modern the sense of humor feels. There's a lot of these movies try to make up for, low budgets and non-professional actors and everything by being like, well, it's kind of a joke. We're kind of being funny about it. And a lot of them really fail at being funny because they just have the senses of humor of like just shitty kids or whatever. And there's a sophistication to this. It is an earnestness to it in terms of it is telling a story with it has an investment in the sort of emotional stakes and unlike a lot of the Tim and Eric kind of stuff, it isn't just trying to rub your face in just how gross and grimy and off-putting everything is, while still being a cannibal musical.
Well, it's about something. It's a hashtag Me Too movement movie of all these, if we're going to call one of them, which I've decided to have. This is the hashtag Me Too.
All right.
Shot on video because it's about toxic men and how you deal with the toxic men is you fucking kill them and eat them. It also reminded me of the Fan, the German horror movie, where she is a young girl meets her idol and he's a singer and they have sex and then he rejects her and so she kills him and over a long period of time eats his remains and then dumps the bones.
I can't wait till we talk about the work of Chester Novel Turner, because then we can finally talk about the hashtag Oscars So White movement of shot on video.
Right. Yeah, I mean, what are some other 2 to 8 year old hashtag? I can't remember. We'll figure it out. I'll find some on our little journny here. I might retroactively add some.
I spent a lot of cards of death trying to figure out what color the dress was. So there's that. The next film is Sledgehammer from 1983 by David A. Pryor. It's a I hate this note that you wrote to screw me up. We have our Google Doc right here.
What are you talking about? This hilarious joke I wrote in.
So Sledgehammer is a feature-length version of the stop-motion animated video for the Peter Gabriel song, even though that song didn't come out for 3 more years. No, it is... Thank you, Gabe. It is the first film of David A. Pryor.
I forgot I did.
I'm mad now. We had such a good flow going. This is already going so long. So David A. Pryor is best known for sort of his shot on video action movies. He did Deadly Prey and Man Killers. And he also did a campy slasher movie called Killer Workout. It's probably one of the better known shot on video horror movies. I think it was sort of a video store staple. It was probably one of the earlier shot on video horror movies to show up everywhere. And it is a pretty typical slasher movie. It's a group of friends sort of get away in this sort of timeshare cabin, and they're stranded there up on this mountain, and the ghost of someone who committed a terrible act, however many years ago, has returned to bump them off one by one.
Yeah, it's a standard slasher movie from the 80s, except for that every shot is between 3 seconds and 3 minutes too long.
Yeah.
Just nothing cuts away when you think it should. And then there was one scene where there was establishing shot of the house that was static for so long I thought the DVD broke.
It feels like someone's first feature, and a lot of it is clearly so David A. Pryor, between Killer Workout and Deadly Prey, there's a lot of if not homoerotic tension, there is a lot of just muscly men and just sort of real buff types in his movies, and you get the idea that he was just sort of in this sort of LA workout scene, and he was just a sort of an exercise nut, and him and all of his exercise nut friends got together to make this movie, and they weren't actors, so instead of asking them to memorize a bunch of lines, he'd be like, all right, in this scene, you do this, and go. So there's a lot of where the camera's just set up on a tripod, and you just watch non-actors improvise for a very long time. And how amusing you find that, I personally found it pretty amusing, but I could also see this being insufferable.
A couple of them are literally bodybuilders.
Yeah.
are of all the things they don't know how to act drunk, I found very amusing. These literal bodybuilders pretending to be drunk and sort of doing impressions of like Bluto and Popeye being drunk. Like, but yeah, I found that part very amusing. And I was amused by how shabby this apartment it takes place in. It's supposed to take place in a house in the country, but it's clearly like an apartment.
Yeah, at some point there's like something going on upstairs and downstairs at the same time, but like you never see a set of stairs anywhere. It's just a hallway, and it's very clear it's just someone's apartment. And then the exteriors were shot elsewhere.
And there's just weird things like the notes I made for myself is there's a fish that they're listening to like their hip adult quote music on a Fisher-Price record player for that plays singles. I thought that was so bizarre. It's like they just happened. That was the only record player the guy had in his house. And then there's a thing of this. I tried to make a note every time it happened. It's not going to happen on most of these movies, but there's like a joke that I don't understand. And in this case, when the women are talking shit about the men because the men are being pretty obnoxious the whole movie, one of them says that her partner always wears a mask in bed, and then her friend asked her how they kiss, and then he replies with he doesn't wear it on his face. And I missed a whole bunch of the movie because I was trying to figure out if he wore a tiny mask on his dick and wondering how they would have sex in that case, if this was like a euphemism for a condom and that was a reason to laugh at him, or if he had like a torso mask.
Oh, a mask is a euphemism for a condom? Like it was like a Jimmy hat, but instead it's
I could not figure out what the meaning of that, because they laugh for a while.
Make sure to wear a mask, man. You know, it's the 80s. You better wear a mask.
He doesn't wear it on his face, and then, like, seriously, like a minute straight of laughing at because that was the best joke and burn anybody's ever made.
I feel like at this point we should probably point out that if you're the kind of person who views the quality of movies as a sort of the sum of how good the writing is, how good the direction is, how good the acting is, how good the cinematography is, how good the story is, all of that, probably most of these movies will fail miserably, and you'll look at them and you'll be like, this is one of the worst movies ever made. But for me, there is a sort of alchemy to it all, where I just sort of dip into a different mode of viewing. And I mean, slasher movies are already something that's kind of meditative or whatever, but shot on video, this has an amazing droning soundtrack. It's very minimalist. I feel like a lot of movies that try to have like 80s ass horror soundtracks now that are they think that they're doing John Carpenter. John Carpenter was more traditional and more orchestrated than I think a lot of the things that people do now. I think a lot of the things that people do now sounds more like Sledgehammer.
Not the Peter Gabriel song, the soundtrack,
the score,
movie,
which had three different composers doing the score to this movie. So I don't know what
there's some like folk songs about love, and like they didn't shoot enough footage, so it's two people like cuddling and looking at flowers in super slow motion. So they basically walk like 8 feet, but it takes a whole 3-minute song.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things where I think I mentioned this the first time we recorded, where after I watched all these movies, I watched 2 Cary Grant movies, and I was just blown away by how amazingly well made they were. And I realized I just like something had clicked wrong in my mind, that I was approaching the shot on video movies as real cinema.
Yeah.
And that I couldn't remember what like a classic film was like.
And I will say the other thing I really like about this movie is that in the third act, there is a sort of twist where it becomes supernatural and it just starts, all sorts of really wild shit pops off. At no point is David A. Pryor interested in establishing the quote unquote rules of this ghost, or really like, oh, I know, we need to do this in order to set its soul at rest. And you know, it's just sort of, again, I use Fulci as a sort of shorthand for this sort of irrational kind of horror, where the fact that nothing that's happening makes sense is additive and it does not detract from the experience. By the end of this movie, there are moments of it where I'm like, this is really scary. There's a moment where it's like, you see, because the ghost that is killing everyone was a little kid who killed his parents, or no, he killed his mom and his mom's lover in the opening sequence, and you see flashbacks to it, even though it's like just happened. Very stretched out flashbacks of that. And then at a certain point, he is a kid and then grows up into an adult in a single shot, and it's a really cool effect. There's certain, especially with the droning score, there's certain parts of this movie that are really eerie and I think successful and pretty frightening.
And the last act moves,
Yeah.
which is something that's going to come up a lot. So yeah, the fact that the last act makes up for the first two, and the fact that the soundtrack was really awesome, are definitely two things that come up for me a lot over and over again as we go through this list.
Yeah. Next one, speaking of a last act moving and the first two parts maybe not moving so much, Suffer Little Children, 1983, directed by Alan Briggs. Go ahead and talk to me about this one.
Well, okay, so what you found out is that this was made for British children's acting school, and they for some reason decided to make a horror movie instead of, I don't know, a movie about I guess it is technically a movie about orphans. They basically are pretending that their acting school is a sort of house for wayward youth, and so a particularly deranged child who doesn't speak comes to the boarding house for children. I don't know what you want to call it, the orphanage, we'll say. And she comes, and things start to go weird because she can sort of invade people's dreams and show them horrible images and give them horrible nightmares, which eventually sort of breaks their spirits, I guess, and they kind of become her thralls.
Yeah, she turns two other little kids into her slaves. It's not just like a little kid tormenting adults. She's tormenting little kids as well.
Yeah, and it was the first one of these I actually really kind of enjoyed. Its biggest shortcoming is the sound is so bad.
Oh my God.
A lot of time goes by and you can't understand a single thing anybody's saying. So you have to sort of infer the plot, and it actually has more plot than most of these. There's this subplot about a former resident of this orphanage who's an adult rock star now, who's pretty clearly, to me, fashioned after Sting, who comes back and wants to check things out and is sort of hanging out with the kids. And I don't know if his plan is to raise money for them.
Yeah, he's going to like put on a concert that raises money and awareness of this like sort of orphanage where he came from.
And he ends up in a sort of relationship with one of the only two employees that work at this place. There's like basically there's a woman and a man, and they have some sort of like on again, off again relationship. They're in charge, and then there are like two kitchen staff ladies who have the only lines you can understand because they speak so loudly when they talk.
It really can't be overstated how, and a lot of these movies have very bad sound mixing. A lot of the audio, because these are non-professional productions, comes from the onboard camera, which you would never do in a professional thing. You would have a boom mic, or you would have lav mics attached to the actors speaking, but a lot of these movies, you just hear the whir of the tape cassette as it's in the camera. And if two actors are 10 feet away from the camera, then it just means that you're not going to hear them too well.
And also they could edit these by just setting up two VCRs next to each other. I had friends in high school that would make little shorts setting up. Editing is something you can do on VHS to VHS, but sound editing is really not.
Yes.
So you have to have additional equipment, and if you don't, you're kind of screwed.
So it's a lot of like the camera angle changes, and all of a sudden you just hear the room tone shift a little bit. The thing about this movie is like there are literally shots of this movie that is a tripod set up like 15 feet away from two desks and two people at them talking about what is happening for like 6 straight minutes, and you can't hear anything that's going on because the music is so loud. And so you're just looking at a long shot of two people in this very bland office talking about something that you don't know what for 6 minutes. And for a while, when I was watching this movie, I did literally think, there's some cool images here or there. It's sort of unsettling in some ways, but this might be the worst movie I've ever seen. And then the ending comes, and the ending is just totally spectacular.
She sort of brings together her forces, and the adults figure out what's going on too late is the best way to describe it. And there's all of this, there's a lot of strobe lights and weird editing, and they start to use color. The music is cool because it's not just the sort of synth that you get in a lot of these, but also there's like punk and psychedelic rock. There's like a psychedelic rock song that plays, so like it feels like a drug trip moment, like really over the top. And Jesus shows up and starts pointing, and there'll be laser sounds because he's pointing. So I guess the idea is Jesus is actually battling this devil girl, who then, I was not clear on this, but it seems like it turns out she's actually like a much older woman in this body, like she's a witch or demon.
She was I think she is a witch of some sort. The thing about these movies is, because they're not made by professional screenwriters, nor do they have professional producers who look at the scripts the screenwriters write and say, well, what about A, B, or C? Is that a lot of these movies have this malevolence to them because bad things happen because bad things happen. Bad things happen because in horror movies, bad things happen. And there's not motivation. There's often the typical revenge angle or justification for why evil ghost is going after these people that would be in a lot of these movies. It just doesn't exist. This girl just sort of is biding her time fucking with people and hurting them. And then at a certain point, just something switches in her and she goes, okay, I guess it's time to kill everybody now. And she just walks into one of the young women who works in the lunchroom and she makes her cut herself. And then there's that crazy strobe freak out in the attic with Jesus. That's really just unbelievably awesome looking. Just the full effect of the VHS aesthetic is on display there.
Yeah, up and coming horror. Oh, my phone's ringing. That's great. That's gonna sound good. Up and coming heavy metal fans might want to try to find this and just throw together a music video with just that part, because you just hit some double bass and some grinding guitars, and you don't even have to edit anything. You got it set.
It's already at 175 BPM.
yeah, exactly. Another thing is that the gore is not elaborate in this, but it's more brutal because it's just like you feel like the people. I guess because it's children, and they feel like there's real pain behind what's happening.
And there's like children panicking while things are happening. It's like the scene in The Brood where the teacher gets killed, even though the kids don't get hurt. Just the fact that the little kids witness it makes it so much more horrible.
Yeah.
This movie is a lot of that. The other thing about this movie is that, and the very final shot is these two people coming into the house. I don't know if it's the people who work there or if it's someone else.
I think it is. It's what's her name in The Rockstar, I think.
She comes and she sort of just witnesses all the carnage, and she just screams. And a lot of the screaming in this movie, again, because the sound editing and recording is so bad, like they will just redline and they will just sort of clip, and they just sound all distorted and crazy when they scream. And she has this crazy, terrible scream that cuts to a freeze frame. And then it's just a freeze frame of her face as on the side of the screen, these computer-generated credits slowly scroll up. Like clearly it was a program where they just input the text and then it put it on the videotape. And this like kind of sad, weird music is playing. And then at a certain point, the music stops, but there's still more credits. So you just hear the sort of tape hiss of the VHS on this freeze frame screaming face. It's so upsetting and disturbing. It's definitely one of the more effectively scary things I've seen in any of these movies. And it does make up for the fact that like the first 50 or so minutes of this movie are absolutely terrible.
And it's interesting to me that they would, with the backstory that this is an acting school for kids, it makes a little bit more sense. But it's like trying to make an amateur film on hard mode is what I wrote in my notes. That you have a room full of amateur child actors. You're already making your life more difficult. But then what's funny about finding out it was made to promote the acting school is that it, of course, created a huge controversy because this was the era of the video nasty.
Right. I don't even know if we mentioned that this is a British film, but it is a British film.
This is a British film, which is why I think that I was trying to tell if the acting was actually better or if they just had British accents. and that made me think it was better.
My God, this is like Shakespeare or something. Listen to those children. No, so there was this threat of banning from a lot of the same legislators. I think probably who, like a lot of the video nasties, they didn't see this movie. They just heard of its reputation and the fact that it all involves children. And they were like, well, this is disgusting. This is, maybe this is child abuse. This should not be seen. And then very quickly, the press discovered the actual circumstances of the making of this movie, which is like, no, a bunch of kids made it themselves with the direction and writing of the people who run the school. And they sort of used that fact to mock the people who were perpetuating all the video nasty stuff. And so this didn't end up on any list. It didn't end up getting banned. And they were having such trouble finding a distributor that by the time this finally was released on tape, all that controversy had totally died down and no one cared. So it was still a failure. Even though on the box they say the most controversial film ever made, or like the most banned film of all time, or something like absolutely hyperbolic and crazy like that. So it's got kind of a fun history to it too.
And it's got a fun, because a lot of these British 80s video controversy stories are actually horrible because they ruin people's lives, are ruined, and like real child murders are blamed on movies and stuff. This one has a happy ending, and the people who tried to ban it felt like idiots. So it's one of the few times when you can tell that whole backstory and not be depressed afterwards.
Oh, also we didn't mention, but there's just tiger posters everywhere.
Yeah. I made a note that there's tiger posters everywhere, and Patrick, last time we recorded this, was saying that he thought that was a thoughtful way of implying that there's something predatory happening.
Yeah, like they're trapped with this kid and they don't even realize yet that this kid spells their doom. But it is this interesting overall effect to this movie that, like, just in the background of these totally mundane scenes, you just see giant posters of tigers.
The lack of another thing that's going to end up coming up a lot in this and part 2 and probably part 3 is the lack of production design that goes into these actually makes a big difference. And you realize a lot of low budget slasher movies that you think of as actually pretty good, or even Euro horror films, that when you put effort into the production design and decorate the sets, even if it's hideous, like in lots of giallo movies, it adds something. It adds something to what's going on. Whereas a lot of these movies feel like they're just an office building. So having these giant, and I mean big, like big posters of tigers, it adds at least something to look at when you can't understand what anybody's saying.
Yes, you need to do something because you sure as hell can't follow the story. The next film is from 1984, The Mad Monk by Julio Aldama. It's a Mexican anthology horror with a Crypt Keeper-esque sort of mad monk presenting the stories. I guess it's based on a series of comic books from Mexico. This is extremely hard to find. I found very little of anyone on the internet even having seen and reviewed it. But anthology horror is something that will keep coming back in these episodes because anthologies were very easy to do in this format because it's something that you can do over time. You don't have to like get a whole production together and tell a complete feature-length story. You can sort of shoot a piecemeal, and if you are a filmmaker without a lot of money or resources, that is a very appealing process. So it's not surprising that so many of these films ended up being anthology films.
Right.
Including one was made by the next filmmaker. But before we talk about his anthology film, we're going to have to talk about Black Devil Doll from Hell by Chester Novel Turner. This is, again, one of the more well-known films on this list. This is a cult classic. This was sort of an underground tape in the days of that would circulate around a lot. And it's so hard to watch. It is so brutal and like
I had a second chance to watch it before this re-recording and I still didn't take it just because of what I knew.
So like in my days of, okay, I'm interested in cult movies, I'm interested in weirdo sort of underground stuff. Like I never wanted to seek this out because I always assumed that it was like this frat boy kind of racist thing where it's this jive talking puppet who torments a woman. And it was just sort of like, oh, isn't it hilarious? All these terrible stereotypes and stuff like that. But this is actually more important than that because this is made by a black filmmaker, which most of these are not. Most of these are, it's a very white, most film in general it's too expensive an art form to be anything other than by majority identities. So most films are made by white men, white straight men, but especially in 1984, the people who would have ready access to this sort of luxury consumer electronics would be more white men. So there aren't a lot of these movies that are made by people of color, and there are even less horror films made in Hollywood and stuff like that that are made by people of color. So this is kind of like is just sort of inherently important because there's just so few black filmmakers of note who were working in the 80s, especially the first half of the 80s. And it does make it harder to just look at this as, oh, this is just some stereotypical stuff that's ignorant. That said, it's also probably a lot of stereotypical content that's ignorant. It's about this woman who's this church-going woman, and she goes to this antique store and she finds this black puppet who is dressed like a farmer and has braids like Rick James because Chester Novel Turner says that he couldn't decide whether or not it should look like a farmer or Rick James, so he did both. So she finds this like ventriloquist dummy kind of puppet, and the person who owns the antique store says that it has some sort of connection to this East Indian shaman type, and that no matter how many times she sells it, the doll always ends up back at the shop. And this woman likes it, and she buys it, and she takes it home, and she puts it on the toilet and starts to undress to go take a shower, and she says, your eyes are going to be the only eyes that see me naked before my husband. So she's a virgin, and she's sort of repressed sexually. And then as she's in the shower, this puppet sort of comes alive and stares at her and then starts working some sort of psychic manipulation on her, and she starts masturbating in the shower, thinking about having sex with the puppet. And then she, catches herself like, oh my God, what am I doing? And then later that night when she's in bed, she gets raped by the puppet. And it is the kind of rape scene where it starts off where she's resisting. She's tied to the bed. The doll is calling her bitch and shouting all sorts of demeaning things to her. And then eventually she gets into it, and it's like the greatest sex that anyone's ever had in their lives. And then the puppet disappears, and she sort of seeks out these casual sexual relationships with men, and no one can stack up to the puppet. And she returns to the antique store, and the person's like, I told you, the doll always returns back here. And she goes, all right, well, I'll buy it again because I just need to get some of that sweet puppet lovin'. And she brings it home, and the puppet refuses to come alive. And she starts sort of threatening it and hitting it. And then finally it sort of comes alive, and then it murders her. And then it sort of starts, and then at the very end of the movie, it starts anew with a new person going into the antique store and being like, what's this puppet? So, like, on the face value, this is a movie that is utterly ridiculous, and it's just a totally preposterous, nonsense kind of a plot, but it is taken really seriously. It is a lot of really bad feelings, like when you're watching this woman in this super long sex scene where the puppet's little tongue is coming out and she's just writhing around, and like you see her like just sort of desperately trying to find other men to get that back, and like there's just it's all about the bad vibes. It isn't, there's some joke to it, there is some sense of humor to it, there is a very dark sense of humor to it, but like mostly is it about taking an absurd premise and then grounding it in realistic emotional stakes, and it's really unpleasant to watch. Go ahead.
And what we figured out the last time we talked about this is I mentioned it has a lot in common with the last part of Trilogy of Terror, which was a made-for-TV movie by Dan Curtis. It was 3 parts, all starring Karen Black, and the last part, her mom gives her a Zuni fetish doll, and it's supposed to basically represent everything from like her repressed sexuality to just sort of racist iconography attacking white women.
Yeah.
And so it does seem like Black Devil Doll from Hell is sort of a comment on that.
Yeah, Trilogy of Terror was a very popular TV movie, and it still is, and people still look at that final segment and they look at it fondly. And because it's goofy fun, where it's a lot of like little puppet antics of her being chased around and all the stuff that makes the, you know, earlier Child's Play movies fun and stuff like that also applies to that segment, Trilogy of Terror. It's just that, yeah, it's also built on this racist, like, literally holding a spear and wearing a loincloth, like, African tribesman statue going like, bah, 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 like
Yeah.
it's really racist imagery in Trilogy of Terror. And you can look at Chester Novel Turner doing Black Devil Doll from Hell as a sort of response to that movie. But it doesn't necessarily like the veil of satire does not necessarily protect it from being totally fucked up in different ways.
Yeah, but making a statement on race doesn't mean that you have to ignore the misogyny of the of what he did.
Right.
And again, I haven't seen this movie, but it sounds very misogynistic to me.
And honestly, like, we're both white guys, like, this is a movie that probably there are serious film critics who are more equipped to unpack what he is doing and how he is doing it. I can only really speak to my own experience as a viewer, but I can at least acknowledge my limitations there in terms of criticizing a work like this. But it is, I think, one of the things that makes it interesting as opposed to a lot of the other movies on this list is it is extremely challenging, and it is sort of upsetting and unpleasant in a way that most of these movies won't dare. Like, most of these movies, even when they feel like gross or they have bad vibes or whatever, like, they usually have this veneer of just kidding to them. And this movie, just there's something undeniable about it. The score is, of all the minimalist synth scores that populate all these movies, like, this is the most minimalist, like, the most just stripped down and gnarly sounding synths. The quality of the videotape feels worse, like it was shot on a video. Like, I don't know if this is for a fact, or this could just be a matter of how it was transferred to DVD however many years later, like how well those tapes were preserved. But, like, it feels like the quality of the videotape it's shot on is even worse and more damaged. Like, just everything about it feels really grimy and upsetting. There's a scene where the, like, puppet leaps out from, like, around a corner and attacks her, and it goes into this kind of crazy strobing slow motion, and there's this sound that plays it's like genuinely just frightening, and it's so this is a hard to watch movie that is also like, it's
important. You can use the word
I would say this feels like an important film, and Chester Novel Turner feels like an important voice. His anthology horror film that we'll be talking about in a little bit, Tales from the Quad Dead Zone, is another work that really centers itself on bad emotions. And I find and those are the only two films he ever made, and I find them both very interesting. And there are a lot of unique voices that exist in this sphere, but I think his is among the top there. The next one is, speaking of unique voices that shake you to your core, Trash Cans of Terror from 1985 by Chuck Handy. This is dumb. This is just some dumb, goofy shit. It's extremely amateurish sci-fi horror comedy about, like, alien trash cans or whatever. It's got, I think the main thing it's inspired by is actually, like, early Woody Allen movies, like Sleeper and Take the Money and Run and Bananas. Mm-hmm. It's about this sort of nerdy, nebbish guy played by the writer-director Chuck Handy, who sort of has this meet cute with this female bodybuilder in the middle of nowhere, where she doesn't know how she got there, and she's had some kind of encounter with an alien. And later there's a bar fight, which is clearly just, like, the quote-unquote bar is, like, the kitchen in his house. And they have a bar fight that is like, oh yeah, $35,000 worth of damages, but it's just, like, two guys pretending to do a really bad play fighting in an alley. Like, but then she has, like, these crazy superpowers, and she doesn't know what to do with them, and they're sort of on the run. This is the most amateurish of all of the movies I watched, or at least among the very bottom. As far as, this is a movie where you will have random jump cuts where people forget their lines and then look at the camera, and then they'll jump, and then suddenly they've said it. So it's like, he just, instead of redoing a take, he just edits out the parts where people talk to him or break character, and then sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes you literally at the end of a shot just hear them go, "How is that?" Or you hear him behind the camera being, "All right, that's good." There are moments where people like break character and they just start giggling, or you hear his direction from behind the camera. There's a lot of stuff like that. It is super amateurish. It also has like a Coleman Francis kind of a feel, like Beast of Yucca Flats, where there's a lot of the storytelling is just done by narration because it was the easiest, cheapest way to do it. It has definitely like a reheated Woody Allen kind of sense of humor, where like at some point she gets captured by the aliens, and it is a cool sequence where she's all negative, which means all the colors have been flipped, which is something that video cameras could do very easily. So you see a lot of that negative effect in these movies, and she's all negative, and it's a close-up of her face, and the aliens are like, "We have such plans for you. You are designed for more than your body can handle at this moment." And that was like a kind of a cool moment, but then it's like followed by a joke where it's like, "We're giving you 10,000 orgasms a second. What? How did you survive that? I'm from California." And it's like, all right, all of this just feels like someone who doesn't know why Woody Allen is funny, but thinks that they can imitate him. It's just dumb fun. My bigger question is, how did this get to be a movie that has like an IMDb page? Like, how did this get to be a movie that people saw? Like, it feels like a movie that he makes with his friends and then shows them to his friends, and they all just laugh at it, and that's where it ends. But instead, this is a movie that lives on and has articles written about it and is, exists on YouTube. And I wonder how this movie from 1985 lingered on,
right?
Because it's not good, and it's not. Of all the movies on this list, if I went to a video store and I paid my money and I rented this and brought it home, I would be the most upset.
And that's saying something.
Yeah. Next is The Bounty Hunters from 1985 by Bruno Pisciuta, which is an Italian production in Canada. I don't know if it was just the filmmaker who was Italian or the whole crew, but
it probably was the whole crew, because, like I said, the basically the Italian industry figured out that North American video was a thing they could do, and I'm sure at some point they figured out that Canada was even cheaper than America, because America was catching on to all of their guerrilla filmmaking and making them pay fines and shit.
Sure. So this is the horror part comes in that it's about this cult leader murderer who's killed a bunch of people. So then these two Vietnam vets are hired to track him down. Apparently it's got sort of just like a long, bizarre, winding plot. There's no opening or closing credits, and it's just extremely slow and boring. So I have not seen it. It's not available online, but that's its reputation. The next is Survival Earth from 1985, directed by Peter McCubbin, which is the first of Emeritus Productions shot on video horror movies. And we should talk a little bit about them. They were an Ontario-based film production company that was created by former TV host Lionel Schenken. And they produced they cranked out 30 movies over the course of 5 years. So that was sort of the stuff they were working on. They were working on more professional, sort of that soap opera kind of equipment. We'll be talking about one of their other movies next that you did actually see. Yeah. This one, it's a post-apocalyptic film, and most of the movie, it seems to just have 3 people. And from what I've read from reviews and stuff, it seems like the plot is just ripped off from Roger Corman's Last Woman on Earth, which is one of the movies he made in Puerto Rico while on vacation. Right. So, and I think the fact that they made 30 movies in 5 years and sold them to TV kind of implies that they were operating on a similar Corman-esque kind of philosophy of just cranking them out as fast as possible. And some of them did actually end up, getting a wider release as far as like playing on cable in America as well, in the days when cable was sort of desperate for product and you could kind of get anything on there.
Nickelodeon was like 90% Canadian shows that Americans didn't heard of.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, I don't know why all these kids have Australian accents, but I guess that's just what this show happens to be. Yeah. The next one is The Tower by Jim Makachuk, which you watched, and it's another Emeritus production. Tell me about The Tower, Gabe.
So The Tower I wanted to watch because I like evil computer movies, which Jim and I talked about on our techno horror episode. This one actually would have fit. I didn't know about it. I would have put it on the list. And I like when there's a futuristic building of some kind that people get caught inside, and this has both of those. So movies like Shivers, which is also Canadian, Demons 2, a whole bunch of there's hospital horror movies where people get trapped in a nice hospital. They get trapped in the college in Shakma, and they get attacked by a baboon. It's just the vibes I like, and we're talking, all these are about vibes. So I was looking forward to this. It is made for TV, so they do pull their punches. They were definitely not trying to do R-rated, but it's a really hard PG-13 or C-12, whatever Canadian rating. And I think honestly, it is cheap. But for me, as someone who likes the aesthetic of cheap sci-fi, the sci-fi stuff is all great. There are these, and I wanted to call them vector graphics, but they're not actually vector graphics. They are raster-based graphics that sort of draw out an image one line at a time. And you used to see them on old adventure computer games. You would like walk into a new room of a dungeon, and it would draw out the entire thing in front of you. Since it couldn't really be animated, that was the animation. So it has a lot of that from the computer's point of view. I should say it's about a building with an advanced that's basically has all its security and everything run by this advanced computer, and there's no real good reason for that because it's an office building. It's not like it's the building for some sort of Skynet like place that needs to keep everything secret. It's just the upstairs is an ad agency, and then there's different things on every floor. Anyway, the computer is left in charge, and of course she has a wonderful Siri-like calm lady voice. She's left in charge for the weekend and promptly decides to trap the few people that are inside, measure all their BTU output based on their heat. So there's all these great little what are supposed to be heat vision graphics that have been drawn by this computer. And then it absorbs these people to conserve power for the evening is pretty much what it seems like its thing is, which is like the plot of The Matrix, sort of, is that human BTU heat is going to power the earth. In reality, we don't make enough electricity. But because of that, the people don't die in cool ways like they do in Death Spa, which also has an evil computer that happens to be haunted and uses the machinery of the Death Spa to murder people. Instead, they're absorbed using that negative thing you were just talking about for Trash Cans of Terror. There'll be like a negative shot and then they'll disappear, clothes and all. And so like these people are trying to find a way out of the building, and there's a young security guard. His superior is immediately murdered. There's a subplot that never quite makes sense about a corporate espionage guy on the top floor trying to steal stuff. There's another subplot about the boss at a certain business trying to do his umpteenth affair with an assistant, and they get absorbed into a copier while they're having trying to have sex, which was kind of cool.
They get eaten. Let's just say it. This computer is eating people.
Anytime they get near an electronic outlet of some kind, it tries to eat them and suck them into it. So there's a lot of scenes of people like going, "Oh my god," because there'll be like a spark from the wall outlet or whatever. And then there's the security guard's super sexy girlfriend comes in because apparently there's a pool that he lets her swim in. So that's how they get like their sex appeal without having an actual sex scene, is she just puts on a bikini and swims around for a little while. And then the woman, the wife of the philandering boss guy, she gets trapped too. And then the main there's too many characters. The biggest problem with this movie is there's too many goddamn characters. So
yeah,
then there's
it really sounds like it's just a series of people being eaten by computers.
Yeah, so there's it's like a zombie movie where you get all these disparate characters who get in a situation that they have to break out of, and some of them are betraying the others. Or Lifeboat. It's a lifeboat movie. There's an ad agency, and one of the funniest things about the movie is that they have decent production design. Some of the actors are clearly professionals. They have these nice TV cameras to film with. They have somebody doing computer graphics, but they can't make up at halfway even like like remotely okay looking ad, what they call it, ad copy for this guy to show, like, check out my new ad copy. This is going to sell a lot of soap, and it's the most childish, horrible thing you've ever seen in your life. And that just blew my mind that they couldn't just like find an uncle and pay him $20 to make this one piece of ad copy.
Come on, you couldn't find an uncle?
So that's all going on, and then meanwhile, the best part of the movie is the guy who invented it is this sort of nebbish British guy, and he has been going to this same strip club apparently over and over again. And again, because it's made for TV, it's a bikini club more like. And stripper recognizes him, and she sits down with him, and they talk. And it's revealed that she's actually like super intelligent and knows all this stuff. And when they're talking about the computer, she's wondering if the computer is warring between her id and superego. And he says, that's an interesting point I hadn't thought of. And she's asking, and then he's genuinely interested in her work. Like, they watch a music video she's made. And it's actually sort of sweet. And so you kind of
How long is this movie?
Hour 40, I think.
Oh, man.
And that part's kind of cute. And you kind of hope they're going to be the heroes, but instead it's one of the ad men and this other woman who are the boringest romantic vacuum. And that's the problem with the movie, is they'll have long scenes of people with no chemistry talking about things that aren't the evil computer trying to kill them.
I guess the thing is, this is a made-for-TV movie, and
yes,
TV movies have notoriously terrible pacing because they're paced for commercial breaks.
Right. And there's no obvious breaks in this, but there's a lot of places you could put the breaks. I don't know if it ended up getting much of a TV release.
But in general, these movies are like one of the reasons I was able to watch so many in preparation. One of the reasons it was so easy was that in general these movies are under 80 minutes long.
Right.
So like the idea of 100-minute long version of this is just sort of like, ugh, I don't know if I would have the patience for this movie.
I mean, really, if you took you edited it and maybe added a couple of scenes where like people die in gory ways instead of just being absorbed, at least bump it up another star at least, I think. And the score in this one was really nice because it was really chill. It wasn't even really trying to be scary. It was like mood music. What do they call that? Vaporwave. It was like vaporwave.
Oh yeah, vaporwave. Part of the vaporwave aesthetic is definitely
that's true.
Ties back to the shot on video era.
So that was the Tower. I don't know if I really recommend it, but it is on YouTube if you're curious. And
a lot of these movies are on YouTube, so it's worth checking them out if you're curious about any of these titles. Most of them are on YouTube. Mm-hmm. The next one is called Bikers vs. the Undead from 1985 by James R. Buick. This was an unreleased film, but by all account, it is a more ambitious movie with tons of extras. There are zombies created by a scientist who's working on chemical warfare, and a bunch of like bikers and countercultural rocker types or whatever have to fight them. And the biggest thing about this movie is that apparently it's in a really great Phoenix, Arizona time capsule. So if you remember Phoenix, Arizona in the 80s, apparently this is the movie to watch, which is like a lot of these movies. Again, the regionalism is a big part of the appeal, is that they're very specific, and because they're not really thinking about like, oh, will that play in a different town or whatever. They're just sort of making it for themselves. Mm-hmm. And so there is that sort of community theater aspect, and that very specific, everyone, because they're unprofessional actors, they don't have polished accents, so they all have extremely regional dialects, especially in the 80s. I feel like these days people's regional dialects aren't quite as strong as they were 40 years ago.
Unfortunately, Arizona doesn't have a very interesting dialect.
Oh, no.
As you can hear from my accent, my quote accent.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, you did not watch this movie because you were a Tucson boy.
I didn't grow up in Phoenix. Yeah, I grew up in Tucson, so I didn't think I would really recognize. I didn't move to Phoenix until like 1999. And so I just figured I wouldn't recognize anything. And I just had all these other more interesting sounding movies to work from.
Sure.
If it had been shot in Tucson, I would have been on that. I would have already seen it. Frankly, I've probably seen every cult movie that is available that was shooting in and around Tucson, including Nataz The Reflection, which I was really hoping was shot on video, but it was shot on 16 millimeter.
All right. Well, that's Bikers versus the Undead. The next one is another Emeritus production, Canadian direct-to-video, or direct to cable, I should say, anthology horror It's also known as greedy terror, and no one seems to think it's any good, so we'll move on.
Okay. Wait, you didn't? Did you actually say the name? Terror on
Shock,
Tape.
no, Shock Chamber is this one.
Oh, Shock
The
Chamber.
next
I had the
film-
wrong one.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
The next
Yes.
film is Terror on Tape from
That's
1985,
the
directed by Robert Worms. And this is another sort of callback to an era. The thing about the early days of videotapes and video rentals is that it was a space that was sort of undefined. It's like, what do people want to rent? You know, obviously they want to rent movies. They want Casablanca. You know, they want Psycho and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Laurel and Hardy or whatever. But like, there were a lot of instructional videos made around this time, and those would end up in video stores. Sometimes there would be like a free section in a video store because there would be these tapes they'd get for free that were PSAs. There are a lot of like anti-drug
animation, Saturday animation, Saturday All Stars anti-drug thing was free.
Yeah, for sure. There were like, this is maybe a little later. This is probably more like early 90s, but there was like Magic Johnson talking about AIDS, you know?
Yes.
Like that sort of instructional videotape. So there's a lot of videotapes that don't follow the format of a feature film. And Terror on Tape is that, because it is not a feature film. What it is a compilation of film clips hosted by a visibly drunk Cameron Mitchell. And so it's just a bunch of like wild horror clips with interstitials that are shot on video, which is very similar in premise to Mad Ron's Previews from Hell, which is probably the most well-known version of this because it was on Netflix for a while, which is a bunch of horror movie trailers that have sort of framing segments between this guy and his corpse ventriloquist dummy in a movie theater.
Which I'm pretty sure it's also shot on video, wasn't it?
The interstitials were shot on video, while the trailers were all for movies shot on celluloid. So, Terror on Tape follows in that vein. Not a shot on video horror movie, but it warranted mentioning nonetheless. Next is Twisted Illusions, which is directed by Tim Ritter and Joel D. Wincoop. It is the first Tim Ritter shot on video movie. It's an anthology horror. It is 7 segments in 80 minutes, which I am just all about. Including one of the segments was a prototype for his seminal cult favorite, Truth or Dare: A Critical Madness.
It sounds like the TikTok of, or the Vine of shot on video horror anthology.
Well, the thing, especially about these more like kind of disreputable gore focused shot on video horror makers, is that they're really only there to do the special effects anyway. They don't care about characters or plot or atmosphere or anything like that. They're just there to get to the next gory effect. And anthology horror is a great way to just like, and then you build to the punchline, the big bloody climax. And when the only point of those segments is that bloody climax, getting to that faster and having more of them is great. So I have not seen Twisted Illusions. I think it's available on Sub Rosa DVD, but it's not available online. But it's one of the ones I'm more interested in, especially because Tim Ritter became a guy who made so many of these movies. The next one also sort of has a lineage in the world of shot on video horror. Blood Cult from 1985, directed by Christopher Lewis. One of the more, again, well-known shot on video horror movies, because this was made by United Entertainment Pictures, which was a Tulsa, Oklahoma company that was created specifically to produce shot on video horror films. So it's professionally made. It's made on a Sony Betacam video, and it has like professional lighting. It's got like dolly tracks and everything. And this is one of the early shot on video movies that I saw, and I remember just having my mind blown between the contrast of movie that is shot on videotape and thus kind of looks and sounds crummy, but also has all these professional techniques and feels like it was made by people who did this for a living. Who had an actual crew.
More than 2 teenagers.
So I saw this maybe 6-7 years ago. I was quite a fan, but it doesn't have a very good reputation. It has a reputation as being kind of boring. And I do want to say that the more professionally made a shot on video horror movie is, the less of those weird idiosyncratic wrinkles it tends to have. So I can understand why if you're going into it looking for more of the Polonia Brothers vibes, you're not going to get it from Blood Cult. But in my recollection from 6 or so years ago, I thought that movie was pretty good. Next one is the New York Centerfold Massacre from 1985, directed by Louis Farrell. So this was available exclusively via mail order from a company called Macabre Video Underground. And this is a really weird story because it was a movie that was 55 minutes long, which is already barely feature length. But large portions of it were deleted from the final cut because they were lost in a fire, which... Like, you think about that for a second. These are movies shot on videotape. There's probably, like, when you look at the footage, like, a lot of movies, they get lost because of fires that happen in warehouses and stuff, because celluloid is very flammable, and you have all of these canisters stacked, very densely in this warehouse. If a fire breaks out, it could just tear through it and burn everything up. But, like, videotapes, like, it's just a stack of videotapes. You would imagine that a 55-minute horror movie... would just have maybe 6 or 7 videotapes max that all the footage was shot on.
I mean, if they're depending on what speed they were recording, you could fit 6 hours on a videotape.
Right. So assuming a very low ratio of shooting footage to usable footage, it would still be a maximum of just a tiny stack of videotapes. And then how does only one of those get damaged in a way that the movie ends up being 39 minutes instead of 55? I do not know. But also, I love the idea of someone looking in the back of some magazine or newspaper or something and seeing a classified ad for mail order movies, and they see the New York Centerfold Massacre, and they rub their grubby little hands together, and they're like, oh boy, this is going to be some real wild stuff. And what they get is a movie that, by its reputation, no one likes this movie. It has no redeeming value to it. But also, it's only 39 minutes long, and it's incoherent because it's missing of a quarter of the footage. Bizarre. Very strange. New York Centerfold Massacre, very weird story. The next one, also shot by Christopher Lewis, who did Blood Cult from 1985, The Ripper. Now, you saw this one.
Yeah, this was one I had avoided for years because it had such an awful reputation, simply because Tom Savini is in it, but he's only in it for maybe 4 minutes, if that, maybe more like 3 minutes, and was personally very upset by the resulting film, and has always been known to sort of spread that among his fan base at conventions and stuff, things that he wishes he hadn't done. Something similar happened when he was used in the advertising for Nightmares in a Damaged Brain. He basically burned all bridges with that movie. So I think that its reputation was unfortunate, that it was lambasted because it was advertised as a Tom Savini movie. And while it's not a good movie, it's better than awful, because it looks like a real movie for the most part. It has, like you said, it has dolly scenes. It has they think about the 133 to 1 frame, the standard box framing, which is something, for some reason, a lot of these filmmakers don't think about. I don't know if they thought they were going to get to show these in widescreen someday and they would be matted. But characters fill the screen. There's angles. The lighting has some depth to it, but it does look very soap opera. And it even like the sex scenes have they're sort of like safe for TV sex scenes. The idea is that there is a man who is a teacher at a college, and he seems to be like pop culture history. So he is currently teaching about Jack the Ripper and the way Jack the Ripper is represented in pop culture. And he's also sort of a horror movie. He calls himself a horror movie nut, but he's really not very good about it. And he has this one student that's literally calling him at home to remind him that some random movie is going to be on TV. And annoying him, and he doesn't want to be here. But anyway, he's very interested in Jack the Ripper, and he finds a ring and realizes that it's a ring that's in a book of Jack the Ripper lore. And so he buys it. Instead of buying his fiance, they go to an antique store, and his fiance really wants these brass bedposts, and she keeps hinting at it. And instead, he comes and buys this even more expensive, hideous ring that everybody, including himself, thinks is ugly. So that's kind of shitty of him. And after he does this, people start being murdered in ways similar to how Jack the Ripper was murdering people, and they're mostly girls. And there's a really unprogressive scene where they're trying to figure out who's doing this, and he talks to the one of the psychology teachers who claims that if Jack the Ripper lived today, all women would look like prostitutes to him, so he would just kill indiscriminately.
He would just see all those bare ankles and lose his mind.
Yeah, and lose his shit. And so the kind of it has an interesting thing that the student that's bugging him at home and that's just obsessed with horror movies, in normal movie would probably be the killer. I guess he's being set up as a red herring, but I mean, if you're watching the movie, you know it's the Ring is making this guy do this. And he's sort of like Randy from Scream. If Randy like had a girlfriend that loved him and was sort of handsome, and the Ripper kills his girlfriend in a pretty graphic scene, actually, and he's unable to stop it. And then he puts together that it's the teacher, and so he starts stalking the teacher and gets the teacher's fiance involved, and they go to confront him. And that's when he turns into Tom Savini, who is Jack the Ripper reincarnated. The famously British Tom Savini, as you said last time.
Yeah, dude looks like the personification of Italian American, like
the most Sicilian American man.
Yeah.
Yes. And he's good. He's enjoying himself, and he does this whole speech about killing people, and then they just shoot the shit out of him, and he dies. The gore effects are really convincing, so I assume that's how Savini got involved, is that these were like the people making the gore effects were like students of his or acquaintances of his, because I can't off the top of my head remember another one of these movies with more like convincingly graphic special effects. So it isn't, quote, unrated movie. So if I had seen it as a teenager, I probably would have actually liked it more than I assumed I would. I think I was under the impression that it wasn't even very violent, but it is frustratingly listless in the strangest ways. It's too long. Like we were saying, 80 minutes is about your limit. 70's better. I think this one's another 100-minute long movie. And they waste time on weird things. So like his lectures in his classroom are almost real time, or at least they feel like they are. It's like a good 5 minutes of him lecturing. And then there's him antique shopping feels like real time. There's even a part where he goes back to buy the ring, and the woman who owns the antique store says, someone called and I have to reserve that for them. Well, when will they get here? They'll get here at noon. Well, I'll wait. And instead of doing like a time lapse or anything, he just stands awkwardly by the register for several minutes, looking at his clock or his watch and waiting. And like, she takes another customer, and oh my God, it just goes on forever. And then when it's noon and the lady hasn't shown up, he can buy it. And it also needlessly pissed me off because it purports to be sort of this movie nerd movie, which is like horror nerd movie, which is calling back to other horror movies. But at one point they're watching The Conqueror Worm, and you can't see what's on the screen, but you can hear sound effects, and it's like science fiction sound effects and people talking about how the giant worm is eating them and stuff. And The Conqueror Worm is the U.S. title for Witchfinder General, which is a historical movie about witch burning starring Vincent Price. So I'm under the impression that Christopher Lewis heard the title Conqueror Worm and decided to make up something else without knowing anything about it. And then later in the movie, the professor says something about how the first ever Jack the Ripper movie was The Lodger, which was also Hitchcock's first movie. And neither of those facts are true either. And I know they didn't have IMDb, and it wasn't as easy to look this shit up, but it just bothers me that they didn't do just that little bit of research. And no, I'm not being sarcastic here. This genuinely bothered me about the movie because I'm an intolerable person.
Yeah, we've talked in the past about how we can't watch certain things on YouTube because we're both too insufferable when things get, oh, that's not correct.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's The Ripper.
The next film is Cards of Death from 1986, directed by Will McMillan. This is another movie that has a really fascinating backstory. It was kind of a lost, forgotten movie for a long time because it was only ever released on VHS in Japan, I think as some weird sub-imprint of some Sony video label. So this is a movie, despite being an American film, was never released in America until Bleeding Skull did a special edition VHS of it in 2014. And as far as I know, this is still a movie that has not been released on DVD or Blu-ray. It really, can I just say personally, I understand that there are a lot of like shot on video enthusiasts and a lot of, in general, sort of hipster dorks, maybe that's dismissive, who watch a lot of movies on VHSs that they find at, swap meets and Goodwill and stuff like that. There is a sort of phenomenon in these spaces of these labels that do release things on DVD and Blu-ray, doing special releases of movies only on VHS, and it makes me furious. It makes me so mad. There's a movie, Blonde Death, that only ever got I think it was Bleeding Skull again. They did a VHS release of it, and everything I've ever read about Blonde Death, I'm like, that sounds like the coolest movie ever. I wish I was one of the cool kids who had a VCR, but I don't, so I guess I shouldn't watch this movie. Like, oh, it infuriates me.
It's pretty extreme gatekeeping.
Yeah, no, exactly. But at any rate, Cards of Death is a movie that more people should see because it is a totally wild movie visually.
This is my favorite of the ones I still have some more to watch for part 3, but as we're going right now, this was the one I most genuinely liked. It was definitely my speed.
So why don't you talk to me about this movie a little bit?
Well, it was made by actor Will McMillan, who most people will know maybe from George Romero's The Crazies, or playing random cops and tough guys on television in the 80s. And it was shot by Max Shepard, who shot and directed Dark Romance Volume 1 and 2, which we'll talk about Volume 1 and probably in Part 3. And it was apparently something of a passion project. And he plays a undercover cop that is looking into this underground ring of a card game that's... They never explain the rules of the card game, really, but it's sort of like poker with tarot cards. And the winner of the game gets to murder the loser. And the other people get sort of like, prizes in that they get to have sex with the girls that work there or something. And a couple times they mention that. And this guy's undercover gets captured at the beginning of the film. And there's really uncomfortable scene of him being sort of tied up and molested by a much younger woman that kind of just feels like the director wanted to have an excuse
there's a lot of this movie that feels fetishy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of men being tied up and taunted and tormented by women in a way that's like, okay, I hear this is a passion project. I see like scene after scene of the director himself being like, just like half naked women in lingerie, like writhing around his lap, trying to get a rise out of his character, who's this detective. He's like, no, I can't. like it really feels like a very specific kink. And
this was, he disappears then, and we presume dead. They send bits and pieces of him to his office. So the rest of the movie is sort of cut between this pretty well shot kind of Law and Order type cop drama where they're trying to figure out how this underground ring works, and then most of the movie is how this underground ring works and what happens in this underground ring. And there's basically two people who run it, a man and a woman. And the man is they're both particularly bloodthirsty, kind of very fetishistic people that kind of rape each other in two scenes throughout the movie, and they're surrounded by big abstract neon sculpture and smoke and it looks like kind of like a black box for plays that they're filming in.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
It almost certainly is.
and the way that it works is they have sort of false prostitutes that go out, and if you know the right prostitute to go to, you can get into this gambling ring, and it costs a lot of money to get in. So I guess it's got a little bit of that kind of most dangerous game hostile thing going on where
But it doesn't seem like it's a money-making enterprise.
No.
It feels like it is, like, if you, like, I was waiting for a reveal where it's like, actually we're doing all this because we're trying to summon our Dark Lord and we need this many souls or something. Like, it felt like there must be some ulterior motive for these two, but I guess their ulterior motive is just they're so wicked.
Yeah.
That they just love all this murder.
And so like all the staff are scantily clad women who are like these host prostitutes, but like it's hard to say what their exact job function is. And all the costumes have this sort of post-apocalyptic feel. To me, it was like
it's kind of punk.
Yeah, it's punk, but so it's kind of like to me like what if Mad Max, like concurrent to the Mad Max that's happening in Australia, there's also an apocalypse happening in LA. And there are these people who just have rated costume shops because there's like Halloween costume, mix and match, patchwork stuff that just makes it feel apocalyptic, even though outside is really just the real world and pretty mundane at that. That dichotomy was really interesting. And then the other really interesting thing about it is how long some of the scenes are that aren't really narrative driven. Like you said, everything seems like a fetish. Everybody dresses like a fetish. There's a room. You saw it more recently. Maybe they call it like the smash room or the crush room, or when they get betrayed by their
it looks more like a closet that is
Yeah.
in this sort of black box theater sort of setting where they play this game. Also, you should say the place where they play this game, it's sort of defined by these jagged line neon lights that because it's shot on videotape, one of the things that videotape has is these comet tails, which is when something is very bright, it sort of leaves an imprint on the video as the camera pans. So like, for example, if you've ever seen like an old episode of SNL, when they have the stage lights on screen and the camera moves, you can see that it's sort of leaving this like black trail behind them. That's these sort of comet tails, and this whole set has these really intense neon lights that even when the neon lights aren't on camera, the glow from them is so intense that it sort of overpowers the faces and the people who are in it, and the entire look is really wild. And it was shot by Mark Shepard, who is the director of another movie we'll be talking about in part 3 called Dark Romances Volume 1. And then he also did the sequel, Dark Romances Volume 2, which also has an extremely specific look. And what I would call Mark Shepard's style is basically the fetish of like crazy, hyper-saturated neon lights and colors that is sort of a modern interpretation of what the 80s looked like, but doesn't actually exist in any movies from the 80s except for these movies.
Right.
You look at this and you go like, yes, this is some what were we talking? This is like some vaporwave music video. This is some like Grimes. You could see like someone like an artist like her having a music video that looks like this. Mm-hmm. It is so over the top and the style is so overblown, especially because it is juxtaposed by these like cop scenes where the cops are just sort of sitting in a normal ass office. And those scenes, they're still directed, like they still clearly are shot by someone who knows how to use a camera and knows how to like stage a scene. But they are specifically look mundane because it makes it feel like, you know, thematically, this is sort of this criminal underworld, and it really does make this world feel actively sort of like this other world. Like it feels like this completely different dimension that these scenes are taking place in.
I think, and now that you've seen,
and we were talking about the crush room, but the crush room is this like weird closet attached to this space that like a wall slowly moves in, and then these people, like in one scene it's a woman, another scene it's a man, are chained up, and they're writhing around as this wall very slowly pushes them and smashes them. And like a lot of scenes in the movie, it just feels like someone's fetish of someone getting smashed.
Yeah, and then they drink the blood, and it just goes on forever. The one thing I couldn't find something direct to compare it to, other than it feels like a postmodern music video that's supposed to feel 80s, but it did remind me of the really over the top things that Rob Zombie did to try to recreate the 70s, and that really misanthropic and bleak kind of nihilistic thing that just goes on too long and is just all about color and texture, but it doesn't have the throwback that does. It's like the real thing.
Actually, now that I think about it, Mark Shepard's cinematography looks a lot like some of Rob Zombie's Hellbilly Deluxe era music videos.
Right, right.
Rob Zombie was really into like weird video effects and color separation and stuff like Living Dead Girl and Super Beast.
Yeah.
If you go back and watch those music videos, and I think probably that is, especially his music video for What Lurks on Channel X, to me is one of the closest things to the color schemes and sort of the wild coloration of these movies.
So I don't know. I feel like there's something better to compare it to, but that was what just kept on popping in my mind.
For me, this movie, I would have enjoyed it more if I understood the game. But like so much of it was just sort of like, I don't know who these people are in the game. I don't know what the stakes are. I don't know who's winning or losing. I don't know like what is going to happen next. I felt there were too many question marks, and again, it's a little bit longer. It's like a little past 90 minutes. And in a movie that was shorter, if it was like 20 minutes shorter or whatever, I would not have any problems with that. But at the length it was, I needed a little bit more investment.
There's a whole thing about there's a priest who wants to participate, but it's not really clear why he wants to participate.
I think he has all these gambling debts and stuff, and he needs the money. He needs to be able to put the money back in the church, I think.
Also, okay, so he doesn't think he'll be the one killed. It would have been more interesting to have him win and then have to kill somebody,
right?
Than losing. And anyway, this is something that could be remade by, you could just remake it and be a little more specific. I think the guy's still alive.
Well, who can deny the name value of Cards of Death? That movie that was only released on VHS and.
It got a Shudder release. It's not on Shudder anymore, unfortunately, but it was on Shudder for a while, so maybe some people saw it. I don't know. Maybe Shudder will just pay for it. They sometimes make movies, don't they? I don't know. Let's move on.
Yeah.
We're almost at the end.
The next one is even stranger movie, Witch Doctor of the Living Dead, directed by Charles Abi Inonchong, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong. It's a Nigerian film by a Nigerian filmmaker. It is extremely rudimentary filmmaking. I don't believe it was edited in camera, but a lot of the times it feels that way. It feels like people will have a conversation where the camera just cuts back and forth, and instead of being a typical two-shot where it's cutting back and forth between the same two shots, the camera slightly changes angle each time, as if they just reset up the camera for every additional line. It is a horror movie about this Nigerian village that is being besieged by this witch doctor, and people don't believe that it's a witch doctor, and there's one person. It's almost like, what's funny is it is so rough. It is so, everyone is shouting. All the lines are shouted. Most lines are just repeated multiple times. Everything just goes on and just keeps getting repeated. Like, there's a zombie attack at one point where it's literally a close-up of a guy, and the zombies are just like guys in white face paint, just like screaming for like 4 minutes straight. It is like just ear-splitting screams. Unbelievable. It's very rough to sit through, but it is also, you watch it and you're like, this is clearly just a village got together and they decided that they wanted to make a movie. The version I watched on YouTube had a little credit at the beginning for like a production company that implied that this did get a video release in some way. What kind of video release this got, I don't know. But what's funny is, like, even though it's so rough around the edges, the basic story arc is something similar to like a Jaws, or maybe like a Jaws 2, where there's this village that keeps getting attacked by these zombies by this witch doctor, and no one believes the one guy who understands what's going on. And so it keeps happening. And there's some very charming effects where it's like a lot of stop motion and stuff like that. It's on YouTube. You should probably just check it out for a little bit just to see what it looks like. But considering that a lot of Wakaliwood has been getting a lot of notice.
Nollywood, Nigerian Nollywood, yeah. There's a good documentary on the subject called Nollywood Babylon, which is where I learned most of what I know about it. But yeah, it's the third largest film industry in the world, behind Hollywood and Bollywood. And they sell a lot of videos, straight to video stuff. It has its own culture behind it, and it's sort of got semi-recently discovered by, like in the last 10 years, by American kind of cult movie people. So I don't know a lot about it. But this was at
Wakaliwood, the people who made, like, what were those films? Who Killed Captain Alex? And
yeah, I believe that's separate.
I can't remember what country those are from, but different African country.
Yeah, so I'm far from an expert in Nollywood,
yeah, same.
But I do know that it has a pedigree behind it, and it's kind of its own thing. And as far as there's probably more that were shot on video that we just have no access to.
And I've seen this referenced as the first Nigerian film ever made, which I find extremely doubtful.
It's just no way.
But at any rate, it is an early Nigerian shot on video horror movie, and it does definitely have that feeling that a lot of the best shot on video has, where you really feel like you're just seeing the people who made it, more so even than the characters that they're portraying.
And that's the end of part 1. Stay tuned next year in early January and mid-January for parts 2 and 3. I hope everybody has a great holiday season, a happy new year. Stay safe, wear your mask, Black Lives Matter, and I'll talk to you later.